friends are synths.
One of my many flaws in life is that I am a fairly impatient person, and that is also coupled with what is kind of a bit of an addictive personality, and that combination means that I often very quickly get very excited about ideas or projects, and I'll sink a lot of time, resources and money into researching what I need to make a particular thing happen. I'll buy a whole bunch of different bits and pieces, and then unfortunately for whatever reason, maybe I'll hit like a roadblock, maybe I won't be able to get something to work, or maybe just by the time the various bits and pieces arrive, I'll kind of have run out of steam or got bored with that idea and moved on to something else. And so as a result, I have a bunch of projects that are kind of ongoing, shall we say, that I've kind of sat and left and forgotten about for a while and never really returned to. And so this video is going to be about one of those projects in particular, specifically my failed attempt to build a modular synthesizer. Over a year ago now, which is actually pretty shameful to admit, I saw my friend Michael, aka Hex7, who was sharing these videos of a really amazing synthesizer that he was playing with. And when I asked him about it, he said that he'd actually built it himself. And it turned out that it was based on, or was using, the KOSMO modular format. And if you're not familiar with the KOSMO format, it's basically the kind of format that Sam, aka Look Mum No Computer, uses for his modules. And if you go onto his site, you can buy a whole bunch of PCB and panel sets and build your own modules in that kind of format. And so I wanted to get involved in this because the modular that my friend was using looked amazing. And I thought, well, surely I could be able to do this. If I can do this, then anybody can fucking do this. And I got these grand ideas about building a big case and filling it with all these custom modules and recording videos along the way, because at that point I hadn't really started doing videos again on this channel. And so I bought a bunch of different modules because I didn't know how long they'd be selling them or anything. I ordered a whole bunch of components from China and various other places, and I started building this synthesizer thing. However, I ran into a number of problems, and so that's what I'm going to document. And hopefully it'll work out, and if not, then I'll set it all on fire and do something else. The first thing I had to do was build a case, because obviously this is a DIY project. The format is DIY, it's custom, so you need to make your own case. You can't go and buy a specific flight case off the shelf from somewhere like Swan or anything like that. So that's what I decided to do. I got a bunch of wood, or at least that was the plan. And when you watch Sam, aka Look Mum No Computer's videos, he makes it look really easy. You know, just pop down to your local DIY shop and get some offcuts or whatever. However, I know nothing about wood. Sam in his build recommended pine wood, but I couldn't get pine for like a reasonable price. So I picked up balsa wood. Now, I don't know anything about wood, but apparently what I didn't, appreciate with balsa wood is that it's like, and I'm not particularly known for my DIY construction skills, and I also don't actually have access to anywhere that I can saw wood. And so I was trying to find pre-prepared, like pre-cut bits of wood in the right size for the format that you need. However, I couldn't do that. Well, actually I could do that because I found some shelving units that were about the right size and ordered them thinking, oh, this is great, I'll just use the shelves. However, as it turns out, the shelves were made of a type of wood that when you drilled into it, they just split, literally just split in half, which wasn't good at all. And because it was during the pandemic, I couldn't get to, the hardware shop or anything like that. There wasn't, easy access for me as somebody who doesn't have a car. So I ended up having to buy panels of wood that were cut specifically to size and then having them delivered to the house. And because the shelves kind of threw me off, I ended up having to do that twice, which meant that I expended quite a lot of money on what should have been a fairly cheap project to build. Anyway, eventually the case all came together and I painted it this nice fetching red and pink colour, and you may have seen it in the background of some of my videos because I've been using it as kind of a stand for the past wee while since it's got no modules in it. Now, the next step, of course, was to actually build some of the modules that make up the synthesizer. And for this, I was a bit afraid of building the DIY PSU that you need in order to power everything within the case, because before that, I'd never really worked with AC power. It still frightens me to this day, and the capacitors are actually really large on the Frequency Central PCB that Sam and other people use. So I was a bit hesitant about building that straight off the bat. However, there is one of the modules called the Megadrone, which is basically one single part of Sam's giant Megadrone synthesizer. And that particular module runs off its own power supply. So I thought, well, if I build that one, then if it works, that'll be a nice way to test that I'm actually able and capable of doing this stuff before I move on to building the PSU and building out the particular modules that actually require the dedicated kind of modular power supply, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, and perhaps inevitably, I ended up fucking up the Megadrone to the point where I couldn't figure out what was going wrong. I got it to about 95% of the way there, but there were some really big problems with it, and I think I trashed the PCB. And the PCB and set for the Megadrone was actually quite pricey in comparison to the other modules. It was something like £40. And even though that was one of the more simple, straightforward builds, I still managed to cock it up. And so that kind of put me off quite a bit because I didn't want to keep sinking money into this stuff and breaking it and ending up basically with an empty case. However, the project stalled, and that is literally what I've had for the past year, is this big red and pink empty case just staring at me, mocking me. Now, recently, in a rare flash of inspiration, perhaps from watching some of my fellow YouTube compadre loner shies videos or something like that, I decided I would try and pick up building these modules again. And I've been reflecting on some of the things that I did before that went wrong and meant that I'd fucked it up, and this, big case that is a testament to my failure for so long. And so I'm going to run through some of the things that I've observed or learned from my first fuck up. Now, the first kind of realisation that I had was that initially I was trying to do too much at once. I'd bitten off far more than I could chew. And by that I mean that even though I was going to build the Megadrone first and get that working, simultaneously I was also working on the other PCBs to try and bring them all along a bit at a time. And that meant that the project was overwhelming, and I was never actually seeing any real progress, which really began to wear me down quite a lot and put me off, because it's no fun building things if all you're doing is building and never seeing any kind of end result. I needed some kind of impetus to keep going, and that would have been a completed working module. And I think trying to do, or at least working on multiple modules at once, meant that I wasn't giving them the attention and the kind of paying close enough attention that each module required, which inevitably led to the initial fuck up. And it also meant that I wasn't learning from any of the mistakes I'd made, because I was probably making the same mistakes on all of those PCBs at once. Ultimately, all of this meant that I quickly lost interest because I wasn't really seeing any progress. The progress I was seeing was just failure after failure, or difficulty after difficulty, where I'd soldered something in the wrong place and had to pull it out again, or I'd found that the resistors I was using were the wrong ones, or whatever it might have been. I needed some kind of reason and motivation to keep going, and I didn't have that because I was doing too much at once. The second big mistake I made was trying to take too many shortcuts. Now, I'd bought all these PCB sets at once, and that meant that I'd outlaid quite a lot of cash on a whole bunch of different modules that I couldn't do anything with at that point, and so I was trying to save money wherever I could, not least because this was meant to be a really cheap, easy project, by the way. But I found that when I was looking for components, I was trying to go the cheapest way possible. So I was ordering components in bulk from China, which meant that they were taking months to arrive, and often they were turning up and then I would start working on a module and then I would discover that they were broken, or perhaps just that I needed a different kind of component, and that meant that I then had to order them in China again if I wanted to get the best price, which meant waiting months and months and months. And so this kind of combination of lack of plan and trying to get the cheapest components available meant that everything took way longer than it really should have. Again, I wasn't seeing any progress, and ultimately, it was one of the main reasons why I kind of gave up. Now, the other thing about buying cheap components is that if you buy cheap components, you can make mistakes. And when you're buying it in bulk, you then have lots of kind of inappropriate components that you can't do anything with. And I discovered this when I've started trying to make these modules again, because the original potentiometers I bought were really cheap ones from China, which worked fine. They do what they need to do, but they don't have a retaining nut or screw in the top of them. And that means that they don't really affix properly to the panel, so everything is a wee bit wobbly. And so I began to think about different ways I could kind of get around that. Maybe I could hot glue them in and try and keep things stable. But the best option in the end, unfortunately, was just to buy a whole new set of potentiometers that actually were the proper recommended ones in the first place. Now, they obviously were way more expensive than buying these cheaper components in bulk. However, if I hadn't had to buy the pots twice, that would have been a lot cheaper than just buying the proper ones the first time. So that's another lesson learned. I'm going to try in future to actually have a plan and not take as many shortcuts just for the sake of economy. The final thing that I realised I was doing back then also was that I've got a very kind of, obviously, like I said, impatient attitude, and a kind of, well, fuck it, it'll do. I'll just try it and see if it works, rather than actually taking the time to do the research on each individual module and working on them one at a time. So, for example, if you go onto the Look Mum No Computer discourse, muddled up two words there, the discourse, which is the forum, there are threads on each of the individual modules, and there's a whole bunch of tips and hints in there about doing things a certain way that might mean that you have less problems later on. And so if I'd actually bothered to do that instead of just ploughing ahead, then things would have been much easier and I would have been much less likely to give up as quickly as I did, I think. So anyway, I've started to build this project again. I am now focusing on two specific modules. They are about 95% complete. I'm waiting on a few components to arrive. I've decided just to buy them from UK suppliers at this point, because even though it's a bit more expensive, I'll get them this week or next week and I'll be able to plough ahead and keep the momentum going, which is really important. I've also been much more organised about my parts list. I've got everything in a spreadsheet and now I'm ticking everything off as I'm soldering them in. I've also learned a lot more about electronics. I've got a few wee devices that quickly help me test components to make sure that A, they are working, but also B, that they are what I expect them to, even though I have still managed to make some mistakes in that end. But all of this means that I'm in a much better place in terms of at least being organised, so that if I do run into problems with a particular module, then at least it'll be one module with one set of problems, rather than trying to tackle, 6 or 10 different modules with their own problems and quickly getting kind of scunnered with the whole lot. Arriving today actually are the final parts for my PSU, because I got over the fear of building it and I just decided I would go ahead, and it couldn't be that big of a challenge. And it's been relatively straightforward so far. I am going to properly test it and everything before I actually plug it in. I'm not just going to do what I would usually do and go, fuck it, let's see what happens. So hopefully within the next week or so, I should have, well, maybe I shouldn't say a week, but within the near future, I'll have the first few modules up and running in the KOSMO synth. And as we go on, I'll start to hopefully be able to demonstrate it and talk about my build progress and all that crap, and you can see some of the things that I'm building. The ultimate idea, or the ultimate aim, I guess I should say, is I want to build a bunch of the modules that I've got from the Look Mum No Computer site. Sam's got all these interesting things, including one that uses a valve as a distortion, which I'm really excited about. But after that, I would really like to kind of put some of my own designs and my own custom kind of panels or whatever the case might be. So I'm beginning to look at doing that as well. However, I am not going to go too far down that rabbit hole until I know that this stuff actually works. So that's the plan. Hopefully soon you'll be seeing some completed successful builds from me and not just a big red box that sits in the background of all my videos. If you've made one of these synthesizers, or if you've got any tips for me like that, please do share, because at this point this is a new wind, actually. I'm not going to say this is the bane of my life. It's a chance. We all deserve another chance. So, here we go.